Guys? The last video went on kind of long, so I'm going to try and keep this one shorter. But we're going to go into the last phase of how politics got where they are, role of presidents in that. And this is more the effects of Bush and the global war on terror that was continued on under Obama, and what led to what we'd call the populist movement. Okay, so the 1990s, 9/11, and global war on terror were the last module. With the 1990s are this economic and IO and cultural boom. For the economic reasons, you have NAFTA and other trade deals like that, increasing cooperation. And there's this high GDP per capita. The average American is doing quite well. We have lots of international organizations too, so there's lots of states joining IOs. There's more IOs overall. And a lot of this is due to the unipolar moment following the end of the USSR. You don't have to choose between the United States or the Soviet Union anymore. It's all sort of under this one leadership now. There's less competition, more cooperation. And of course, the cultural reasons were because Enter the Wu-Tang releases in 1993, and The Sopranos begins airing in 1999. But the good times can never last, and a lot of that comes to an end with a series of attacks. The first one being, of course, on October 12th, 2000. This is the USS Cole bombing in Yemeni waters. 17 dead, that's 15 sailors, 2 attackers. Then there's the super infamous September 11th attacks. 2 planes crash into the 2 main towers of the World Trade Center Plaza. 1 plane crashes into the Pentagon. 1 plane crashes toward DC and a field in Pennsylvania after passengers try to retake control of the cockpit. The day of, there's a total of 2,977 victims plus 19 hijackers dead. And on top of that, thousands more have died and continue to die due to complications. We talk about the particulate matter and poisons in the air from collapsing skyscrapers. That's the main reason for it. From September 18th to October 12th, 2001, almost like the October 12th is meaning something, anthrax letters targeting politicians and journalists are sent out. Because of the writing inside the letters, death to America, glory to Allah, people believe that they're from radical Islamic groups. It's never been proven in a court of law because the main suspect killed himself, but now it's believed to be from a disgruntled federal scientist looking to take advantage of the chaos. Overall, 5 dead, dozens injured. This kicks off the first steps to the global war on terror. So first you have Operation Enduring Freedom. That's the invasion of Afghanistan. Operation Iraqi Freedom, invasion of Iraq with a far more controversial vote. And the wider global war on terror, affecting dozens of mostly Muslim-majority states. That leads to even more presidential power, especially due to Hillary Clinton and the Iraq vote. If you recall, what really damaged her in the DNC primary in 2008 was her vote to invade Iraq, and not only her vote, but her support of the invasion. Billions of dollars spent on developing these states, especially Iraq and Afghanistan. Ultimately, no major development objectives are successful. We all remember the images from the evacuation, people falling out of planes and stuff like that. There's an increase in the security state, so there's new departments like Department of Homeland Security and the NSA, and new invasive laws like the Patriot Act, and then there's new interpretations of extant laws like Smith v. Maryland. And we'll get into Smith v. Maryland during the Supreme Court part. So we'll be going over the road to populism today, or what really happened in reaction to these foreign policy decisions. Several elements in a short time, and not just the US. but it's the unpopularity, but still continuation of the global war on terror. A lot of people feel like it went on far longer than it needed to. And as a quick aside, there's the mishandling of Libya. Then 2008 financial crisis and the Eurozone disaster, union decline and disappearance of the middle class, and mass migration. Importantly, one group of people are blamed for all of this, or at least one common thread, and it's elites. It's a backlash against the current, or at least contemporary regimes making all these policy decisions in these different states. Most importantly for this class, the United States. Now, global war on terror, widely seen as a failure, billions spent to end in no democracies in either of the two main targets. This is a $43 million gas station. And I know what you're thinking. Once again, Paul, you super charismatic guy. How did this cost 43 million US taxpayer dollars? And the problem is that, well, two main things. One, it was never secure, so it kept getting blown up and rebuilt, blown up and rebuilt. Two, corruption was a massive issue. So even building it up every time costs way more than it should. So a quick aside with Libya, because we have to get into these foreign policy decisions too. We'll go in depth later. This is Muammar Gaddafi. His nickname in the West was the Mad Dog of the Middle East. Notorious for taking part, or at least funding, several terrorist attacks, including an airplane attack on the UK. He tried to unify all of Africa into something kind of like the EU and make himself the leader of it. It obviously didn't work out. Brutal dictator who ruled over his people, and one of the things that really kept him in power is an intentional use of that phrase. One of the things that really kept him in power and kept his detractors in check was his weapons of mass destruction. He had chemical weapons and had a nuclear weapons program. And in response to sanctions from the international community led by the US, he actually ended up giving up his weapons of mass destruction. So you would think, that's great, that's awesome. How could that possibly end poorly? Well, you're not looking past Libya, because what happens is he has no weapons to keep him in power. He's still despised by the international community, so no one's really going to have his back. So what ends up happening is civil war breaks out, he's removed from office, and kind of like Saddam, he's found in a drain pipe. Now, with Saddam, I could show you one frame of his execution. With how brutally Gaddafi was murdered or killed, or however you want to say, there's just no way to put that in this class in an appropriate way. I had mentioned his nickname was the Mad Dog of the Middle East, and came to be appropriate because he was ultimately put down like a dog. He had some things happen to him, beaten among the least bad, and then he was shot. Killed like a dog in the streets. And you might be thinking, Paul, you once again super charismatic guy. Who gives a shit? Who cares? The guy, I even said he was a funder of terrorism. He killed thousands of innocent people. Who cares if Libya got rid of their weapons and we were able to get this pretty bad dude killed? Well, three people care that I can think of off the top of my head, and we want these people to think the other way, or at least one would think. And those three people are Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un, and the Ayatollah. Dictators with weapons of mass destruction. So once this precedent is set, and what happens to you after you get rid of your WMD is very likely, or it's going to be far more difficult to have any real dictators with WMDs get rid of them, because they probably saw the video of what happened to Gaddafi. So global war on terror led by the United States is sort of seen as a wash. Didn't really work out, billions wasted, none of the major goals accomplished. Let's not talk about the US for a bit, but talk about something that would come to affect the US further down the line, and that is the PIGS, or the PIIGS, and that stands for Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Greece, and Spain. So, aside from the UK at this time, every European state uses the euro. The issue is that they all have different treasuries. And so one thing that happens is that the PIGS, so Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Greece, and Spain, take out a huge amount of debt of euros and are risking default. So they're about to ruin the euro for everybody, essentially, if their debt's not paid, and they can't pay it. So all of Europe gives them a bailout. So many non-PIGS voters are angry they have to pay the pensions of. One of the big examples was Greeks who retired at 55 years old. And I think the example of Greek pensioners really stuck out in people's mind because Greece is a beautiful place with a terrible economy. And so to have somebody retire at a relatively young age, 55, and just live the rest of their life on Easy Street in a beautiful country, while other people pay for that, obviously didn't go well. And so a bunch of protests kicked off, and that led to, especially within Europe, what we think of as the populist wave. It was one of the main reasons for it. Now, when we think of Europe, we think of, or the EU, it's probably the most cooperation you can ever really have between states. I mean, they even share a currency, which is a huge deal. And so to have all this go down was very, very much of a backlash toward too much cooperation. Probably the most dramatic example of this was UKIP and Nigel Farage. I pronounced it Fargy for the longest time because I'd only read it. I hadn't heard anyone say it. And then I was talking with a British friend and I said Nigel Fargy, and she's like, "Do you mean Farage?" And it made fun of me. But anyway, so the UK Independence Party, or UKIP, basically runs on this idea of Brexit, or let's completely stop. The UK doesn't want to be involved in the EU anymore. There's just way too much stuff going on, way too much cooperation. We're paying other people's bills constantly. It's not good for us. That was UKIP's push. Of course, the other push was that cooperation helps. It's really convenient to be able to travel anywhere and do all this. People can bail us out if we have trouble, which is a huge, so we're happy to bail other people out when they're in trouble. So there's this big debate. It was eventually put to a vote, and they think 9 times out of 10 the UK wouldn't have left, but this was that 1 out of 10. It was a very, very, very shocking upset, but they had to stick by it, and the UK had to leave the EU. So that's what we call Brexit. And there are some worries that other European states would leave. I don't know which states were most likely to. As of time of recording, it hasn't happened yet. I don't know which states were most likely to. I just knew which ones made the funniest puns. So like it'll leave, checked out. Those are pretty good. Brexit's probably still the best though. And that kicked off or was part of a wave of other big right-wing pushes, so right-wing and populist pushes within the within Europe. On the left, we've talked about her before Marie Le Pen. When she was being introduced in American news cycles, I know I've talked about this before, but it really is worth repeating. When she was introduced within the United States news cycles, she was sort of introduced or summarized as the quote unquote Donald Trump of France. As I said, she had been at the game a lot longer than Trump. Similar politics, very populist, very anti-migration. So it would be more accurate to say Donald Trump is the Marie Le Pen of America. In the middle, you have Giorgia Meloni, who came into power later on, and is still in control or in power in Italy. She had kind of a weird arc where she made a bunch of right-wing promises, got into office, and didn't follow through on them, is what a lot of the right says. And then on the right, you have Viktor Orban from Hungary. Okay, so we have mass migration. We don't have enough time to get into the pros and cons of mass migration. People feel very strongly about this, especially given the current political climate in the United States. But a lot of the populism, especially right-wing populism, was backlash against this. There's a phenomenon in politics that whenever there's a bad economy, immigrants, especially big waves of immigrants, are blamed for it. Sometimes immigrant populations play a role in that. Often they don't. So we're not talking about the actual, we could argue that all day, but it's just I think, or at least hope by this point is undeniable that we could all agree that the right wing does blame a lot of economic problems on migrants. Rightfully or wrongfully, not going to touch that, but we will say that having a bunch of migrants come in and then bad economy is going to fuel a lot of animosity among the right wing. So a lot of the hangover from the 90s economy kicked up and sort of started affecting Americans at this point. I know I make the 90s sound better than they were. To be fair, we have Sopranos and Wu-Tang Clan, so there's that. But one of them being outsourcing, so sending jobs to countries that can pay lower wages, increase U.S.-China competition, so everything has to be leaner. There's NAFTA, which ends up causing a lot of trade to come from the United States and diffuses it more. And then there's full-on, not outsourcing like the first one, but what's called offshoring. So outsourcing is, your headquarters in the United States, but your employees are in India. Offshoring is you send the entire factories overseas. And so, especially in like the Midwest, a lot of cities that all rely on like a steel mill or something, the whole town is essentially destroyed instead of just a few jobs. And this would go on to be used as a cudgel against Hillary Clinton because, once again, she didn't have a huge role in it. She was just First Lady, but she's the wife of Bill Clinton, who was president and oversaw a lot of this. Now, I don't know how all of you feel about unions. I have no opinions really of myself, or at least other than what UT tells me I can have. So union membership ends up going down. You can see that as a good thing, or you can see that as a bad thing because there's a correlation between unions and the middle class that you can see actually at the bottom left, the middle class getting smaller and smaller. And then I think everyone's seen this graph, productivity going up, but wages not going up nearly as much. So you're expected to produce more, but you're getting paid worse and worse. This is where a lot of left-wing populism especially kicks in. We'll talk about Bernie Sanders in a second, but it was a full-time job's salary at minimum wage. Should it or should it not be able to pay for a studio apartment with no roommates? Um, a lot of people feel a lot of different ways about that, but that's becoming more and more of an issue on the American and overall Anglosphere, American European mind at the time. Then things go really poorly. 2008, there's the financial crisis. You can see from the graph there, just billions of dollars of wealth vanish because of what's called the subprime mortgage crisis. So people who don't really qualify for houses don't pay their mortgages. These debts pile up. The people who gave them the loans can't pay back the loans that they took to give the loans. So it all sort of snowballs into this global financial crisis. There's a saying that when America or the United States, when the United States sneezes, the whole world catches a cold. So it sets off this domino effect because the American economy is relied on to be so stable. It sets off this domino effect. It ends up hurting a lot of the world, especially the developed world. And the elites don't play it well. So worldwide financial crisis hits. Bankers who kept gambling and lost crashed the economy. So on the left, you have a guy who is sentenced to prison for life for marijuana possession. To be fair, he had a shit ton of marijuana, and it wasn't his first offense. That being said, if it becomes legal in all 50 states and federally, he'll still be in prison. Whereas with the financial crisis, none of the people who caused it were sentenced to jail, prison, except for this one guy, and it's not for causing it, it's trying to cover it up and lie to his investors. Because if there's one thing elites don't like, it's when you lie to investors. And to clarify, what I say with elites is very powerful people, lots of money or influence. Now, to contrast the difference between Wall Street and Main Street even more is with Main Street, or the average American, what we'd call like the 99%, so non-elite, is the amount of foreclosures that really kicked off then. Foreclosures when like you lose your house at the bank or credit union or something. But we see that more people with prime or like who had reasonable mortgages, like I have, ended up losing their houses than people with subprime mortgages. And that's because, well, all these people who really couldn't afford the loans they took out and shouldn't have been able to take them out, but Wall Street was willing to take that bet. So they lost their houses because of their inability to pay. But a lot of people who had actually taken out loans they could afford at the time also lost their houses because the domino effect from the subprime foreclosures ended up having a lot of companies go out of business. People can't pay their bills, people can't pay their mortgage, it gets foreclosed on. So a lot of people who were just innocent bystanders really lost their homes too. And while that's going on Main Street, Wall Street got completely bailed out. So not only did they not go to jail, but the taxpayers who are losing their houses end up paying for the mistakes of people who caused it. The perception that really kicks off if what we call Main Street is that the US economy is really just a casino. People are gambling on investments and stuff like that. The difference is that if anyone on Main Street loses, they're out. If anyone on Wall Street loses, Main Street's still out. All the prime mortgages who were still foreclosed on. And so it really begins to look to a lot of people like it's a rigged system. And so this is especially what kicked off in the United States. Everything else talked about up till then is a major factor, sure, but this is probably the key factor in what kicks off the populist wave. This idea of a two-tier justice system, or a two-tier economy. This is where I have to reiterate what I said on day one. Don't look at me. I promise whatever you think I'm trying to tell you about my own politics or how I frame things, I promise you you're wrong. I don't talk about my own politics in this class. I know other professors, other teachers feel like they should, so people know their bias and can get a different perspective if they want. A lot of educators just see their jobs, right and left, I might add, see their jobs as indoctrination, or they want to teach the next generation to think like they do. That's not me. I don't care about your politics. You really shouldn't care about my politics. But I promise I'm going to I'm going to phrase something poorly. I'm going to screw up on my own terms. And you're going to think I'm trying to lean one way or the other, where I'm not. I promise you, you don't know my politics, and you hopefully never will. Okay, you can't see me right now, but my hand is shaking as I drink out of this glass of water because I really feel like people are going to make assumptions about my politics. Once again, I said, I promise you're wrong. But global financial crisis kicks off in the United States, the populist movement really in earnest. And there's a right side and a left side. For the left, we'll start with is the Occupy Wall Street movement. So a bunch of protests on Wall Street. They say they're going to occupy it or not let people have easy access in or out. Of course, they can't block them, that's illegal. But they're going to occupy it, show their dissatisfaction with the bankers that screwed everything up and then got bailed out for it. It really had a lot of momentum at the beginning, and it fell apart due to, people will say, different reasons. From what I saw and who I've talked to, sort of the consensus I've gotten is that a lot of it was identity politics, or a lot of the movement was very prone to infighting on basis of identity or privilege, especially. I do remember seeing some videos at the time of them trying to divvy up time to talk at their rallies based on race, gender, sexuality, just any form of identity you can think of. And for a lot of people at home watching, it made them look a little silly sometimes. Its big lasting legacy, though, is that it really kicked off the language of the 99% versus the 1%. So what I was earlier referring to is like Main Street being the 99%, Wall Street being the 1%. And they had all these stats about who has what percentage of the population controls what percentage of the wealth. So all this talk about income inequality and stuff like that. But the media likes it when people look clownish, and so the identity politics really did a damage on it. But on the right side, you had the Tea Party. You won't out ridiculous me, I guess, was their opinion. But Tea Party, T standing for taxed enough already, but also a reference to the Boston Tea Party. But it was very right-wing, anti-populist. You can probably tell what the Tea Party supporters eventually ended up joining. And of course, one was mainly younger people, and one was older people. And that's generally how people voted back then. I think it kind of is still now, but young people going left, older people going right. They both brought up good points. They both had sort of clownish elements to them, like with any movement, really. So it's not really a endorsement or condemnation of either. Now, with both sort of the residue of the Occupy movement after it fell apart, and with what was still the Tea Party going strong, both had enough people to have had enough votes to have a big influence on the primaries, but didn't have enough to choose who the candidate was, if that makes sense. So any candidate who wants a real shot is going to need to appeal to them, but both of these populist movements don't have the real final say. So for the Tea Party, the guy who's finally able to break through is Wall Street billionaire Mitt Romney, senator from Utah. His pitch is basically like, I know you guys are mad. Take a risk on me. I can beat Obama, and I'm gonna do everything you guys wanted within reason. So he gets the nomination, and their mind immediately goes against all that, and so they're really, really mad, especially after he loses. So the Tea Party, this is sort of their most famous hat. I don't know why I didn't put it in the earlier ones, but like I said, reference to the Boston Tea Party, but TEA meaning taxed enough already. Between that and pigs meaning Portugal, Ireland, Italy, and Spain, or Greece and Spain, it's kind of a fun class, right? Um, but they are completely done in their minds with what they think of as mainstream Republicans. So that's coming off 2012 election. There's still sort of the hangover of dealing with that loss. And then 2015, 2014, some more movement, some pretty organic, some of it not. Interest starts coming up around another guy. And by 2015, they're trading one hat for another. So of course, Donald Trump ends up really distinguishing himself in the 2015, going to the 2016 election GOP primaries. So for those who don't know who Trump is, I don't know how you don't know, but famous real estate billionaire from New York City, wrote a book, Art of the Deal, had a very successful TV show called The Apprentice. It's sort of the golden age of reality TV. Also, funnily enough, a big, some would say opportunist, but still a supporter of both Bill Clinton's presidential runs and Hillary Clinton's senatorial runs. But like I said, in the Republican, sometimes I say GOP. That just means Republican, Grand Old Party. But in the Republican primary, he really distinguished himself just constantly by standing out in a field of what was seen as basically clones of Mitt Romney or Republicans that only really represented what we'd call Wall Street. He was willing to say really relatively uncouth stuff. Of course, there's his famous quote about Mexicans that I'm not going to repeat. Point being is that he distinguished himself enough from the field to win the nomination, especially with all the vitriol the Tea Party Republicans had for what they think of as establishment Republicans. Now, with the Democrats, or sometimes I'll say DNC and not realize it, there are two main candidates. Just like before Hillary Clinton, some more corporate, what we'd call elitist. And then on the populist wing, you have Bernie Sanders, so socialist. To a lot of people, Bernie Sanders sort of came out of nowhere. I had never heard his name before this election, but it turns out he'd always been around. When I say I'd heard his name, I'm not into American politics. I'm IR. So, but he had a tenure people didn't realize. He had been at civil rights protests since the 60s. And had a very consistent record on basically everything but illegal immigration. He used to be very anti-illegal immigration, then he flopped on it when he didn't want to look like Trump. The other candidate we talked about in our last module was Hillary Clinton. So former First Lady, she became the senator for New York. Yeah, notorious Iraq vote. Very much seen as the Wall Street friendly one. She's literally senator from New York. And then there's the email scandal, not the Hillary having the unprotected server scandal, which was a big deal at the time, but then in the last couple of years, both Trump and Biden got caught doing similar things. But the other email scandal with Hillary was emails between the guy on the bottom left, John Podesta, and the woman on the top, Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Podesta was hacked, but there was a lot of internal emails within the Democratic National Committee, so the leadership of the party. What people said was that they were rigging the primaries against Bernie because the party leadership is, of course, going to be as establishment as it gets, so they're going to support Hillary. That's not exactly the case. What was really happening was through their emails and how they talked about Bernie Sanders, they were very obviously in favor of Hillary Clinton winning the primary and eventually becoming president was the idea. But the emails are leaked. What is proven is that there's an institutional bias. So for the Bernie Sanders wing, the populist wing, they're thinking, oh, well, because there's this bias, we're not going to have a fair primary. There's no smoking gun, but there's the belief that there is a smoking gun somewhere, that this is enough evidence to show that, well, not to show, but to at least suspect that the primary was rigged against Bernie. Like I said, no evidence, no smoking gun, but it was really not a good look, especially because Hillary's supposed to be, or supposedly the better candidate, that she would need this sort of support from the National Committee. She might not have needed. She might not have even gotten, but it is worth mentioning. So what really helped Trump in the primary stand out from what a lot of the Republicans saw as clones of Mitt Romney was his ability to stand out. And that ended up hurting at least his media presence or turning him off on a lot of people was the same thing. And just quotes that aren't common for presidents to say. So people had a tough time, especially thinking of him as president. So comments about Mexico that I'm not going to repeat. Comments about women that I'm not going to repeat. Speaking of, he had tons of accusers come forward from rape, sexual assault, abuse, all these different crimes. And then about one particular person, John McCain, he said that John McCain was a POW in Vietnam, so I believe it was 5 years he was tortured by the Vietnamese. Trump, who was old enough to serve in Vietnam but didn't, insulted his record for being captured, implying that people who weren't captured were better. And for those of you who forgot, John McCain was the guy who ran in 2008. I mentioned the 2008 election every class, so I'm just going to keep it going and keep reusing the slide. But yeah, 2008 election mentioned. Count it. I don't know why I made this into vaporwave, but here we are. What ended up, one might say, working for him in the long term, others, it would be very debated. But a lot of the stories and media firestorms that cut up around Trump and Hillary were often seen as fake news. There's the famous Trump quote, fake news. So with especially the Democrats crying wolf so many times and Trump playing it so well, he was able to sort of blur the line between accusation and reality, making it so that people were having a hard time telling when he was telling the truth, what accusations were real. People were often saying it's a post-truth environment. So a lot of the scandals really didn't hit him as hard as they would other candidates. Of course, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton are both politicians, so they're going to lie. But what had ended up happening a lot of the time was this boomerang effect, or people not really believing any of the lies. And so, very boy who cried wolf. Isn't to say many people were very enthusiastic about having them as candidates. You can see from this graph that, especially during the Obama years, and even Bush, people were generally a lot more enthusiastic about candidates than they were in the 2016 election, a trend that would pretty much continue beyond 2016, as we all know. And it was very fun to be living in China at this time, not only because we got to see like the late night election results live, um, big watch party in my classroom there, but also so many people had moved to China at the time saying that whoever won, they didn't want to live in the United States during this. For the record, it's not why I moved to China. I moved to China because they could do my visa paperwork a week faster than if I had moved to Colombia, but I wanted to teach. Now, it's true that being popular is important for a populist movement, but you also have to have people enthusiastic enough to show up to the polls. And this is one thing Hillary Clinton very much struggled with. Um, so, first and foremost, as a guy who, if y'all know one thing about me, it's I wholeheartedly respect the rap game. This actress Lena Dunham tried to do a pro Hillary Clinton rap, and it came across as the kids would say, cringe. But it was made to be a big deal within the Hillary Clinton camp. Um, then there was a bunch of celebrities singing "Fight Song," which was Hillary Clinton's campaign song. It's like I'm not gonna sing it, but um, they thought it would go over kind of well. If y'all remember, like the Gal Gadot song during COVID when they sang "Imagine," it wasn't that bad, but it was still not received well. Uh, Quick aside though, but Julie Bowen, the blonde lady flexing, is like one of the coolest actresses ever. Um, and then music aside, there was also just her inability to really connect with Main Street. So they try to say like more like Chillery Clinton, um, which as a lover of dad jokes, I can respect that game. But it became a meme to dunk on her a lot of the time. Another one that really haunted her was this video game at the time that was very popular called Pokemon Go. She kept talking about how they need to get people to Pokemon Go to the polls. You can tell that there's a certain level of enthusiasm she's asking for where it's just not really there. And then finally, there is um, what I find to be the most egregious is her inability to pour beer. I'm joking about that, of course. Um, but this really did turn off a lot of people, especially in the Midwest, where the votes really, where the votes would have, she really needed them to win the electoral college. So to summarize what this election looked like, it's Trump and Clinton were both elites. Clinton's already a senator, former first lady, and Trump is literally a billionaire. I mean, these are both very much people who are in the 1%. But Clinton was neoliberal, so market-oriented, left-centrist, more global. Focused on going wide for voters, focused on getting as many people as she could from as many different groups. The trade-off is they're not going to be very enthusiastic to actually come to the polls, and she's not going to be very targeted in where they vote. Trump was populist, so there's more limits to the market. He's right or far right, more isolationist. In his second term, of course, one of the biggest things he talked about was tariffs. Focused on going deep for voters, or less people but more enthusiastic, and then especially within more targeted areas, so you can win the electoral college. And you can see it really did play out kind of the way that they played it. It really didn't come down. It was a very close race. Um, when you come down to like the county level votes on which ones were actually determinative of who's going to be president. But the popular vote, going wide, appealing to as many people as possible, panned out in the popular vote. But the popular vote isn't what wins elections. And so while Clinton trounced Trump in the popular vote, Trump won the popular vote by a lot in an upset that basically nobody saw coming. When I say nobody saw coming, I say nobody saw coming. This was from the Huffington Post, which is a very left-leaning news service. I don't know if they're still around. I kind of remember them just sort of disappearing from relevance after this, if I'm being honest. But this is how HuffPost was huge at the time, and they still had credibility to lose, and they lost a lot of it with giving Trump a 1.6% chance of winning. Now, long before the financial crisis, long before the United States, basically since the beginning of time, politics have been ridiculous. But because of this new desire to stand out even more, you see sort of more and more progressively ridiculous and intentionally ridiculous behavior from politicians going to this day. For balance, I put two Democrats and two Republicans up. But it's more or less where we're at now, is in the populist wave. We are going to cut it before COVID because it's so recent and it throws so much stuff off that next week we are going to jump into more stuff about the actual decision-making processes and who has to go through where. So what's kicking off, or what kicked off this populist wave in the United States and even Europe? Well, we have this whole, the precursors being dissatisfaction with economic health in these developed countries, stemming from the financial crisis, Eurozone collapse, NAFTA, mass migration, just an overall sense that people's financial health is getting worse and not seeing anything to compensate for it. The global war on terror, people are still hung up about how long it took, how much money it wasted, how little got done. And there's this whole idea that the 1% or elite class is out of touch or more the same politicians. Social media, of course, throws gasoline on all of this. All these more moments go viral, and it leads to the environment we see today. Elites are blamed for a lot of this. So elites are blamed for it, meaning that, of course, that non-elites, average Joe is going to be seen upon more favorably, or people who can pretend to be average Joes at the very least. Or there's this whole idea that Wall Street is eating Main Street, which would work in an authoritarian system, but it's a democracy, so Main Street pushes back, but there are still some benefits to Wall Street. I know it's not very cool to say, so sort of stuck in suspension between these two. But yeah, I'm going to leave it there. I hope you guys have a good weekend. Hopefully it warms up soon. All right, see ya.